Hi, I'm Still Speaks, and this is a video talking about the cost of trading card games with the title, Have I Been Priced Out of Playing Trading Card Games? I played Magic for a very long time. I primarily these days play Flesh and Blood, so I'm going to talk more about Flesh and Blood, but I guess Magic, kind of the same thing applies. We're in a very weird place with trading card games at the moment. Like, the secondary market's going crazy. Companies like Wizards of the Coast are deliberately trying to, in my mind anyway, deliberately underprinting the amount of cards, and to a certain extent, like, the FOMO of the perception of the underprinting is driving up the cost, right? Out there. So even if they weren't underprinting, people are buying more than they need in order to drive up the price and create FOMO, causing a shortage, whereas theoretically, if all the product that was printed was opened, the cards would cost a lot less, right? That kind of dynamic is happening. But I also believe that people are leaning into it. In the Flesh and Blood world, the last two sets were underprinted for the amount of players the game now has. They've mismanaged the growth of the print runs compared to the growth of the player base, which is a mistake anyone can make. But when that happens, you have cards that are worth, 2 times what they should have been worth and they would have been worth in the previous set, coming out and being hard to buy and hard to acquire, as well as certain mismanagement of, generically playable. So for the Magic people, it will be key colorless artifacts. For the bad people, shelters. We're talking about the generically playable cards, right? And for anyone who doesn't play Fab or Magic, we're just talking about something that goes in every deck ever. Better deck, right? Those cards are easy to acquire. But, we're entering into a situation that, one time it happens, somewhat forgivable. 2 times it happens, somewhat forgivable. And then when no drastic steps are done to correct the problem, you end up with a, what I would consider a storm in a teacup sort of situation. So let's talk about exactly what's happening in these card games specifically, because I know that not every card game has this. Like, Pokemon doesn't necessarily have this problem. It just overprints everything. The cost of a competitive deck is quite low. If you want a really shiny one, well, good luck, and I'll see you outside. But no, what do I mean by that? I just mean, like, if you have the cards to buy and you have the cash, show up and you'll get them is kind of what I meant. But let's talk about Fab. So 2 years ago, for outsiders, I did this calculation. I did a whole spreadsheet that basically worked out what I consider to be the total cost of buying into an individual class, right? And it kind of basically just took the price of every Majestic. So we could go into Outsiders, for example, and you'll see it's got, for Assassin, you've got Redback Shroud at 40. That seems reasonable. Shakedown at 13. That's come down a bit. I haven't gone and updated it. Flick Knives at 40. Codex of Frailty at 35, etc. So the price to buy into Arachne when I made this spreadsheet on the 30th of March 2023 was 465 quid. You obviously don't need all of these cards, but a lot of them were playable and you'd want to buy them. I haven't redone it for the latest set. In my head, it's higher. But I think the important thing to note is that when I did this, in my head... Sorry, when I did this, I wasn't factoring in generics, right? And if we do factor in those generic playable cards, so the artifacts, the colorless cards, you do increase the price of buying a full set of a Fab class quite drastically. And I did work out the cost to buy into a specific hero. So for the Magic players, this would be a specific commander deck, for example. And, it does come down quite a bit because there's lots of side cards that you don't need from old heroes to play new heroes. It's that green staple that's good at giving +1 counters, but you're playing a squirrel token deck, that kind of thing. So, it does come down, but the fact is that the cost was already quite high. And as part of this discussion, I went and I made another spreadsheet. And the goal of that spreadsheet was to look at all of the available decks that were in the game and basically say which ones was I going to buy and which ones was I going to sell. Because early on, I basically had every single class. I had the cards for every class. I could build any deck in the game. That's the equivalent of maintaining a full, complete set of playable standard cards for you Magic listeners. And I could do that. And it was fine. It was easy. As the game grew, of course, I couldn't maintain that. And I pared down. And then I pared down again. First, I went from every class down to 8, and then I went down to 6. and then I went down to 4. And it really feels to me, genuinely, that my spend has actually stayed relatively constant, and the amount of cards that I've been able to buy has decreased. Because of essentially the role of certain Majestics, things like Shelter from the Storm, which is still worth quite a lot of money, and other cards like that. Certain legendary sort of equipment, which is generic equipment that can go in any deck, has basically meant that the amount that I would have to spend per set has kind of stayed roughly the same, but the amount of heroes that I've been able to play has dropped. And in the context of this as well, and I think this is kind of important, is the understanding that in the past 5 years, my spend on Fab has stayed the same, but my electricity bill has doubled, my food cost has increased, my rent has gone up, and all these other factors taking away from my wallet have come along. And just for clarity, because I never really particularly hide the job that I do. I am a business analyst. What the Americans would call a white collar worker. I am paid not banker money. I'm not paid like stock trader money. I'm paid a reasonable wage for a white collar worker, above the average. A decent amount. And all of my costs have gone up. And then my spend on Fab is kind of just sitting there as this anchor force, basically saying, how much is it worth for you to play my hobby? And I kind of noticed this really when I got distracted for kind of like 2 sets, right? I got distracted for a bit for High Seas, and I got distracted a bit for Rosetta, right? And what happened in Rosetta, and I'm still trying to translate this into Magic terms, is that basically a class that I play, right? So I play Runeblades, and I play Lightning Runeblades. So I have lots of Lightning Runeblade cards. This is the equivalent of having like green-black cards, and a green-black commander. And when this set came out, there were a load of new cards for green-black for Lightning Runeblade. And in the time that I wasn't paying attention, those cards went from really good to overpriced because they were so good and they were winning tournaments, to banned, right? Because they won too many tournaments and they had to be restrained. And that happened in the space of about 6 months, when I was just busy with work and doing other things. But then to finish and top up my collection, to get it back to having every playable card, I needed to say, just maintain access to one class of the game. I was just sitting there looking at like 200 quid. And then I kept being busy, and the next set came out, and suddenly it was like, well, yeah, it was 200 quid then. Now it's 300. So now it's 500. And then it happened again. And then again and again. And I've kind of been buying cards slowly. But the reality is that, like, there's no... Maybe this is the part that is unique to Fab, or maybe the modern players and the Commander players and the Legacy players who play Magic understand, right? Which is that, like, in Fab, heroes don't rotate on a set schedule. They rotate when they win enough tournaments. And even when they win enough tournaments, the cards that were in the deck are still legal in the future. They're just, like, not playable necessarily right now. And what I mean is, like, imagine if a color from Magic was retired for like a year until they printed another color that could play it. Or like you're playing a fairy deck and the fairy commander gets banned because it's too powerful. You can't play a fairy deck until they print another fairy commander is probably a better way. But the fairy cards aren't not legal. They just don't work at the moment. And in the future, when they come back around, they will be legal. It's kind of how Fab works. So I'm just sitting there looking at this build up of cards that I now have to buy to have a complete collection. And I don't need to buy them all. They're not all playable, but quite a good chunk of them are playable. And quite a good chunk of the generic cards that can go into any deck are quite powerful, and they are quite strong. Now, I think I could have realized this quite a long time ago, but I think what actually happened was kind of a delayed reaction, where I didn't exactly realize how much I was spending because I was caught up in what was going on. And I didn't really process exactly how much money everything was costing me until until I sat down and I stopped doing it. And then the second you stop doing it, you realize that actually this cost per set, per class, which I have around here somewhere, which is, average spend per set. Here we go. Average spend per set to keep relevant within a class, right? Roughly £150 per class. You realize that actually you're spending quite a lot of money. And obviously there's the answer of just play one class, right? If you don't want to pay any more. But when the design of the game is so competitively focused, like it is in Fab, unlike it is in competitive formats in Magic, the answer of just play one doesn't really work, because your locals, the tournaments you go to, like if you're losing, you can have a good time, but you can't have the best time, and you will miss out. And I think it's just important to acknowledge that, like, the spend of what it takes to maintain a gameplay, playable format, whatever, in all of these games is going up. And I think it is worth acknowledging, because then if you turn to the latest, like Magic the Gathering Universes Beyond sets, they are selling out on pre-orders. They are going out of stock. They are being scalped heavily. The price to buy cards on the secondary market is going insane. Collector's booster box is selling for 500 quid. Now, you don't have to buy collectors, right? The Avatar, the Commanders packs and stuff like that going crazy. Like, the price is just going insane. And I think it's just worth just stopping for a minute. And I think I would like everyone who's watching this video to just pause with me for a minute and sit down and do a process genuinely, where you actively, like, go through. This is painful, by the way. It is a painful thing to do. But if you stop and go through how much you actually spend on your card game that you play, and try and figure out exactly how much it is of your monthly disposable, etc. And then I want you to sit down and do something else for me. I want you to sit down and work out, when was the last time you touched, a certain group of cards that you paid a lot of money for, right? And played with them, or even like thought, I enjoyed owning these, right? I think that's kind of important to do. And when I went to this spreadsheet in Fab, and I did the same thing, by the way, with my commander decks. I used to have 7 commander decks. I had Shorikai, I had a ninja deck, I had a green textless creature deck, I had a Prosper deck, I had some other just janky stuff, Lord of the Rings decks, theme decks, and stuff like that. I sold all of them but the green deck, which I've just kept because it's like mid-range power level and can play in a lot of different fields, but occasionally could just stomp like better decks, so it feels good to play sometimes. But I did the same thing in Magic. I looked at all my commander decks and said, haven't touched you in 3 years, haven't touched you in 2 years, haven't touched you in 5 years. And I eventually just sold off anything that was worth money. And then I did the same in Fab. So join me on that journey. Look at the cards that you have available. Ask yourself, when did I last touch X cards? Whatever groupings they fit for you. Maybe it's a commander deck. Maybe it's your Lightning Runeblade cards. Maybe it's your Guardian cards. And then ask yourself how much value those cards are to you. I think that's a big question to do. And I think if you do that process like me, and if you have this rising cost of living, and if you have these problems, like, ask yourself how much joy that is actually bringing. And that's the process that I did. So, like, when I put the title as, have I been priced out of playing TCGs? Obviously the answer is no. Like, I still play TCGs. I have a Fab deck. I have a Fab deck or two that I'm maintaining. But I'm currently 2 sets behind. At some point, I'm going to have to spend the money to buy the cards to catch up, because I'm already losing games at my locals because I haven't bought the latest Majestic or Rare for the deck that I'm playing. And eventually the deck that I play won't be good anymore or will retire, and then I don't know what I'll do. I'll either buy into the next one or I won't. And I think that's just where things stand. And I think we're at a very odd place in trading card games in general, because when I originally started playing, and I've been playing trading card games since I was 9, it very much felt like you could play trading card games and have other hobbies in a way that didn't feel, punishing, right? So you'd pay 100 quid for your latest meta deck, play with it a lot, have that deck for the season. That season would last a reasonable amount of time, 4 or 5 months. And then you'd add a few more cards to it. It would stay relevant for a bit, maybe a few tweaks, or, stuff like that. Occasionally you'd have to switch decks completely, but most of the time you just update it and that's fine. And then you'd kind of keep going, and then eventually you'd have to replace it, etc., etc. But the spend was always somewhat reasonable, and you could play multiple TCGs at the same time. I grew up I played Lord of the Rings TCG, Versus TCG, Magic, and Legend of the Five Rings kind of at the same time. I didn't have perfect decks in all of them, but occasionally I put together a competitive deck in one of them, etc., etc. And it felt like you could do that. And now it feels like, much like in live service games, every single TCG is trying to get you to spend more and more money with them. And every single TCG is trying to get that full lifetime commitment from you, rather than pricing themselves as they are. Like, the reality is that TCGs are a luxury product meant to be played, by a lot of people and be accessible and playable to those people in a lot of different ways, right? By the way, not sponsored by Magic House. You can buy your Magic from any store you like. Other stores are available. But my point is, that's how things used to feel. And I feel like as the prices have increased, and, there's lots of arguments, it costs more to pay people now, you have to pay more for printers, paper and shipping and all this stuff. And I get all of that. But I think we are coming to a point, and I've seen recently a lot of the Magic the Gathering people that I respect and I listen to because they speak the truth and they talk about things in a way that I think is fair and honest, like PleasantKenobi, like the Tolarian Community College, calling attention to the price of the latest Magic sets and the fact that Universes Beyond has forced a markup on all those sets, and just calling attention to the fact that it feels more and more like TCGs are getting pushed into this realm of not just like a luxury game that anyone can play with a reasonable chunk of disposable income. I would say spending £50 to £100 a month on a hobby is not an unreasonable amount of money to spend to participate in that hobby. Ignoring trips and travel to tournaments and things like that, which you'll do every now and then as a treat. But then when you get beyond that, with the speed that Magic is putting out sets, with the cost of certain cards in Flesh and Blood, things start to get very painful. Because the money then doesn't necessarily buy you the same level of enjoyment. You're just stuck in this sunk cost fallacy where you're spending that money because you love the game, your friends play the game, and that's your community, but you're actually being taken to the cleaners. So when I asked that question, have I been priced out of TCGs? And I said the answer is obviously no, because I'm still playing them. I still have decks. I have a deck. My Commander deck is locked. I'm never buying another Magic card for my Commander deck. I may build a Lord of the Rings cube. I'm likely to do it with proxies, to be honest, because I can't be bothered paying the premium for the Lord of the Rings price tag. And I want to point out, I have a hobby budget. That hobby budget is not small, right? I got into Warhammer last October. I have sitting next to me, 800 points of Gitmob Wolves. I have 2 kill teams that I'm painting, etc. These are Raveners. Have a little robot. But my point is, I have a hobby budget. I have had for quite a while, and it was always reasonable. And I have a fab budget. I put 50 quid a month into my fab budget to spend on trading card games, and then I spend it. And then when I spend it and I still can't build the deck that I want to build, it starts to really fucking bother me. I'm gonna swear. It starts to really fucking bother me. Okay, we can swear. I don't really care. This video is not going to be monetized anyway. But the point is, right, if we look at the whole fucking situation, and this is where I realize I moderate myself because I'm British on the internet. If we look at the whole fucking situation, it just gets fucking more and more ridiculous every fucking day, right? Like, you've got cards coming out, they cost 40 or 50 quid, you need 3 of them to play standard, boom, £150 into the deck. Add in a couple other cards, you're playing 400 quid for a standard competitive tournament deck. To me, that's disgusting. To me, that takes the entry point of your game to somewhere astronomical. It locks people into decks they don't even find fun because they've already invested in them. It prevents class switching, which means that people who have bought into a deck can't change. And people with deep wallets can pivot whenever they like. It just creates a toxic environment where you have to enjoy your cards because you've spent so much money on them, which is just like a negative play experience as well. You're like, I have to play that hero because I bought into it. And if I don't get a certain number of games, then I wasted the money and all these other things that just shouldn't happen. And also, you just create this horrible negative loop where it feels like this has to be your only hobby. And if you're not doing it, you're wasting the money you've already spent on it. Which is part of the negative feeling that I've felt is I have to play trading card game X because I have spent money on it, not because I want to today, which then leads to you not wanting to play even more. I think I'll start to wrap up the video now because I think I've kind of made my point, but I'll just point something out here. Why is this happening? I think there are increased costs to make the games that we I think salaries are going up. I think costs of printing are going up. Shipping and tariffs and all these other things are going up. I also believe that these companies are pursuing more and more profit for their investors, for their stakeholders. They have pressures to grow. Fab isn't owned by private equity, as far as I know. It is owned privately, but Magic the Gathering is owned by private equity, and they're squeezing for every fucking penny they can get. But Fab, Fab is quite happy with its status as one of the fastest growing companies in New Zealand. They don't want to start not making as much money and lose that status. They're happy with their status as an up and coming trading card game company, and they want to keep making that revenue so they can keep expanding. And you'll be, I guarantee you they make decent profit margin. But they must, because they can spend £1 million on what is essentially marketing on the tournament scene. So I guarantee you they're making decent money, and they're still putting the prices up, and the game is still more expensive, and they still have a terrible reprint policy. So, something is going on there. And, we've seen all of the problems. I'm having a bit of a rant about Fab now, but obviously that's my game. But we've seen all of the problems from, like, Legacy Magic the Gathering in Flesh and Blood that haven't been addressed in any meaningful way. AKA, here's a card that's playable, it hasn't been reprinted, and it costs 40 quid, and it's mandatory for your deck, because guess what? It's a silver bullet, and we've balanced 2 of our main classes around the fact that this card is available, right? It happened in Modern, it's happening in Fab right now. And that card needed to be reprinted yesterday. It needed to be reprinted the day before, it needed to be printed in the last set, in the previous set, and the fact that it still hasn't been after 2 sets is a bit ridiculous. It should have been an emergency issue that was handled immediately. So, and I guess also the point is they keep fucking doing it because they know that it sells sets that aren't going to sell otherwise, right? And they're terrified. They did a dud set, 4 sets ago, Bright Lights. It didn't sell very well, and they're terrified of it. So as part of that fear, they're making sure that every set, even the crap one, has a certain number of chase cards in them that will never be printed to enough to satisfy demand. What do I mean by that? I did the maths. I can't remember where the spreadsheet is, but I did the maths basically on, there's a card called Command and Conquer in Magic in Flesh and Blood, which is a format staple. Almost every deck plays 3 of them, right? The maths basically said that if you look at every time this card has been reprinted, and you counter that against where we think the player base is now, which is somewhere around, I have it about 50,000, not including Japan. Japan is probably another 10, maybe like 60, 70,000. If you do the math on how many players there are versus the number of Command and Conquers that have been reprinted, there's about a 30,000 shortfall in the player base versus the number of people who can have access to this legal card, right? This card is legal in the standard format of the game. It has no plans to be retired, and it currently costs £65 for one. So a playset is just shy of £200. That is your base level of entry to every single Flesh and Blood deck that exists. Not, I should say that's being a bit facetious. Not all of them play it, but plenty of them do. And then we also have the Fables. Fables are super rare cards that are available. Some of the ones from the earlier sets are playable. A lot of them aren't playable. The ones from the earlier sets that are playable are 400 or 500 quid. They are playable. They are in certain standard decks. And they cost 500 quid. I have them. I should sell them. I make $1,000. I can spend that $1,000 on something else. Right? I won't, because I do enjoy owning them and I'm never going to rebuy them, so I don't want to sell them in case I want to play them. But I should. And they're ridiculous that they're still legal. Right? Like, beyond ridiculous. So this is turning into a rant, and I've sworn a lot. I just want you to get, like, how frustrated I am. And I want you to understand that that frustration comes across every time I interact with the game now. Because both Syndra and Assassins have been balanced around Shelter from the Storm existing. I don't think any Magic players are still listening, but if you are, what this means is that we have lots of heroes that do like chip damage, like 1 point of damage pings, and if the pings hit, that enables other abilities. And they printed a colorless card that can go in any deck that prevents 1 point of damage the next 3 times you would take damage. So an instants are very rare in Fab. So the ability for them to try and ping you to turn on their effects and for you to use this instant is very rare. And but it has another effect as well, right? So there's a common card that prevents 3 points of damage in the same way, but it only has 1 effect. So this one also blocks 4 and does other good stuff. That card is worth, I think it was 40 quid last I checked. That's another 120 quid onto a deck. Every deck at the moment plays them because the classes that it counteracts as a silver bullet are good. I don't have them. Anytime I think about sitting to play a game of Standard, I consider, do I want to spend £120 to be caught up with the Standard format and to have a better game and to a heroes that are everywhere? And if I don't choose to spend that money, I have no actual idea at what point I will be able to not need that card anymore. Because at no point within the current Flesh and Blood ecosystem will that card not be legal, right? And that's part that really fucking annoys me. I hate these generic cards from 6 years ago that cost 75 quid that will never not be legal. We don't have rotation for generic cards in Fab. And you know what? We need to fucking get rid of these cards. Like, they are building up into a bigger and bigger problem. And Fab and LSS has demonstrated over the years of this game that they are not willing to directly tackle that problem in any meaningful way. They reprinted the problem card, and they reprinted it at a super rare rarity so that there weren't going to be enough of them into the market. Now, that strategy has been shown to work for cards that are color or class specific. It worked on Codex of Frailty. I have to acknowledge that. But it doesn't fucking work on generics, and you know that now, so you need a better fucking fix. But guess what? We just had a leak of all the main rarity cards from the new set. There are 2 very good reprints in there, for cards that shouldn't be over 40 quid, but they are because that set was drastically underprinted. What is not in there? Any reprint of staple generic cards that need to be reprinted, and the price needs to come down. So do you know what? I haven't been priced out of Fab. I can still play Fab. I still have decks. Have I been priced out of owning a playset of fucking Shelter of the Storm? I have. I'm not buying them. Fuck off. Right? Absolutely. Just go fuck yourself. I'm not doing it. Have I been priced out of a playset of whatever the new one that gives -1 is? Yeah, fuck off. I'm not buying your generics. I'm not buying an overpriced generic that only exists to sell boxes of a set that no one fucking wants. Right? And I'm just going to be fucking honest about that. Mastery Pack Guardian is a shit opening experience. You open a box, you get like 3 Majestics. If you don't open a Legendary, you just piss £45 down the pisser, right? So if you don't, it's horrible. Like, that box could have fucking 8 Legendaries in, or 8 Majestics in, and you'd still not make your money back. And you're looking at a set where, okay, there's a Marvel worth 400 quid. Congratulations. No one's going to own a Marvel Jarl now. Cool. Great. You've made a collector's chase card. Congratulations. Right? What's the fucking point? What is the point if you print a set and to buy a playset of cards in that set costs £300? Like, what is the actual point? We're not even talking about building a competitive fab deck, right? The ceiling for building a competitive fab deck is out the window. It's like 800 quid. But even then, to update the fab deck you have with cards from the latest set costs like £200. So you're just incrementally being forced to spend more and more and more. And it doesn't justify itself because you're not winning £20,000 in a tournament. You're not. The people who are listening that are, I'm surprised you're still listening. But, you know, if you are, you're not, right? And let's just be honest, you're not. Like, the game is not giving you that much in terms of money. Hey, maybe it is, but, you know, if you're playing it every week with your friends, maybe it is. But if you're engaging with it casually, the game has gotten too expensive for its purpose. The game is supposed to be about going and playing cards in the flesh and blood. Magic is supposed to be about having fun, throwing around cards, putting crazy crazy combinations into your deck, experimenting and seeing where it goes, and having that, you know, the magic of combining different combinations and seeing where things play out. I believe TCGs are failing as a luxury, you know, collectible fun hobby. And they're turning into this weird life cycle cult thing that demands too much from its customers in pursuit of weird profit margins. And I think it's unsustainable. And I'll leave you with this thought. Like, I think with the cost of living crisis the way it's going, with the predicted impact of AI on jobs and wages, that trading card game prices are going to have to fall because consumers aren't going to be able to pay for them anymore. Let's face it, when the choice comes between paying your electricity bill, buying food, you know, all of these other costs, you're not going to pay for the cardboard, right? And I say this as someone who has luxury spending. I mean, you don't have multiple Warhammer armies and a box of 40 paints in if you don't have money to spend. I just bought Tomb World, etc. But I resent the fact that TCGs have to be my only hobby in order to justify the amount of money they ask from me. I just think that's absolutely ridiculous. So I think there is going to be a crash. And do you know what? If I put my full tinfoil hat conspiracy on one last fucking moment before this all wraps up, I think all of these companies know that there's going to be a crash. I think all these companies know there's going to be a crash, and what they're doing right now is they're lining their pockets with as much money as possible while you have it, right? Because I don't think everyone's listening to this, I don't think you're going to have it for that much longer. I think things are going to start to get a bit rougher, and inequality is rising. You know, I'm feeling it, and I'm paid decently well, so I can't imagine what people who are paid the average income in the UK are feeling. You know, so it's coming for all of us. I think they're literally trying to squeeze us for as much as possible so that they have money to weather whatever fucking crash comes out. And guess what? I think in 5 years' time, Magic will come out and say, in response to market forecasts and the fact that our customer base can't sustain it anymore, we're reducing the cost of Magic boosters. Or they're just going to go bust. And you know what happens when private equity companies can't make money from a company anymore? They gut it for all of the assets that are possible and then either destroy it or sell it off to the lowest bidder. And people say that couldn't happen to a behemoth like Wizards of the Coast. Yeah, it fucking could. I work as a contact center analyst. There's a company called Avaya. It's worth looking up. They were considered the Ferrari of contact centers, right? So people you call up when you're calling Vodafone, technology that manages that. They built huge contact centers, 20, 30,000 people, on-premise data center boxes. They'd come into your company, into your data center, they build it. And guess what? People just started building them in the cloud. And a lot of their business started to go away. People started to want to work from home, and a lot of their business started to go away. They've now filed for bankruptcy twice. They're still there because they've got loads of customers and governments and people like that working for them. They still have a plan for the future, but they're a shadow of what they were in terms of reputation. Trading cards are going to go that way. Like, once the main consumer base for these games stops being able to afford the ridiculous prices that are being tacked onto them, they either crumble, reduce prices, which is hard because they have price memory and they have profit margins and investors, or people just leave and the game that you're playing is a shadow of what it was. I'm going to leave it with that. I appreciate some parts of this video got a bit ranty. Maybe I said some things in heat that, you disagree with. If you disagree with me, fucking say it in the comments, right? If you're still listening, like, just for some information, partly due to this, and I'm doing another video that explains the other reasons, but partly due to this, I'm actually ending this YouTube channel because I don't have the energy to keep talking about games that I feel like are fucking ripping me off. Right? And I want to do other hobbies, and I don't feel like the amount of money that's demanded from me justifies only having one hobby. You should be able to diversify. You should be able to maintain your card game collection, play cards, and also do other things without just being like, oh no, they want another £200 from me. Just to build a fucking Guardian deck, by the way. I priced out all my Valda cards that I needed to build a new Guardian deck. Actually, I didn't even price out the ones for Valda. I priced out the cards that I needed to build the Guardian deck, the Victor additions to the Guardian deck. It's 150 quid for a shit set no one wants to open. That's really all I've got to end on, right? Anyway, thank you all for listening. I'd say like and subscribe, but the channel's done. So, if you want to go and look at my legacy, there are 6 years of Flesh and Blood videos. I think I've said some really interesting things. I've reported some really interesting news and talked about things I think the community needed to talk about. If you want to hear about why I'm ending the channel, there is another video coming out tomorrow that just talks about it. It's not just the price. Like, as I said, where I spend my money is a choice. Like, I have disposable income for card games. I have disposable income for Warhammer. I have disposable income for video games. Where I spend my money is a choice. And as a consumer, companies have to earn my loyalty. You don't just get me to keep buying because I have been. I'm constantly reevaluating where I'm spending my money and whether it's worth it. And I'll tell you that for the price that it would cost me to update my Victor deck with cards from Mastery Pack Guardian, I could buy on Steam sale right now about 10 indie games that would give me about 300-400 hours of fun. I could buy a whole kill team box for Warhammer, 2 kill teams that I could probably play every couple of weeks, 3 years until they rotate. You've got to look at how much money you're spending and whether it's actually worth it. You know what? Fab isn't for me anymore. Like, I'm gonna go, I haven't decided what heroes I'm cutting yet, but I'm probably going down to one class. Guardian and Ninja, Blade and Guardian. Maybe not Guardian. And then, if that becomes too expensive for me, then I'm done. I'm not done yet, because I still love the game and I love meeting up and playing cards. But at the point at which my last deck feels too expensive, then I'm done. I'm just going to do what I did with Magic. I'll have one deck. If someone says you want to play Fab, I'll be like, cool. Yeah, let's throw down. I've got this deck from 5 years ago. Fuck. Thank you all for listening. Speak to you all never. I don't know.